HY3 is the internal assessment unit for the depth study. As such, it is set and marked by the centre. As examiners and moderators, we are very pleased with the success of the HY3 exercises. Some are exceptional, especially from the more able candidates, and even more modest candidates produce a good response. HY3 is a success in that it promotes the skills of the young historian in a practical way. We are keen to encourage students to research and find their own sources, to read widely amongst the historians of their topic, and to be able to engage with the historiography of their chosen question. We want them to show that they have the source evaluation skills and the training to judge the validity and utility of sources to historians and to themselves as young historians. We want the students to develop their ability to précis their gathered material and to produce a synopsis of what they have learnt. These are valuable and transferable skills. Above all, we want the students to engage with the issues, to enjoy researching, and to enjoy writing a long essay. If the HY3 exercise becomes a drudge, then something is wrong. The moderators have tried over the past couple of years to stress the increased demands of HY3, especially the consideration of interpretations and historiography, which has rightly been emphasized in this exercise rather than in timed examinations. We're pressing though for improvements and trying to ensure that as many candidates as possible develop essays in which the three main skills area are integrated into one coherent essay. By that, I mean that we want to see the candidates using their source evaluation skills to discuss not only the events, but also the appropriate interpretations and historiographical issues. The last couple of CPD sessions have stressed that integration of these areas is the key to further success at HY3. I cannot stress too highly that candidates who fail to achieve this degree of integration should not gain level 4 in the mark scheme. There is a tendency, probably a relic from the original HY5 coursework unit, for some candidates to tackle this exercise in sections. They begin with a long descriptive introduction, put in a section discussing reliability, and then consider the details of two historians before coming to a conclusion on the interpretation. We do not consider that acceptable practice any longer for this exercise. HY3 has a much greater weight on AO2. We do have major concerns over the small number of centres and their candidates who submit huge scripts with dozens of sources, and I shall have more to say on this issue in a minute or two. We want the candidates at centres to use a wide range of sources, rather than relying solely on the sources provided by the school, the subject teacher, the centre. Where all the candidates from the same centre are using the same narrow range of sources, then something needs to be done by the subject teacher to promote wider reading and wider research. We will want to see less time devoted in the essay to telling us what is in the sources. Centres should instruct candidates to include the source in the body of the essay, and we can read the source for ourselves. The time and words saved there should be used by the candidate to debate, to argue about the value of the source, to considering the event and or the interpretation and or the historiography as appropriate for the selected inquiry. While I'm on this issue, I should stress here that most of the inquiries are addressed appropriately, but there are some where candidates spend too much time discussing the background issues rather than focusing on the particular inquiry set. The Munich crisis on both Britain and Nazi Germany papers are inquiries which often do not deal with Munich itself for most of the essay. There must be a clear focus on the borehole nature of these inquiries. In HY3 then, as in all assessments, candidates need to focus on answering the question and not one of their own making. Subject teachers should be vigilant on this issue as they watch the work develop. Candidates who do not focus on discussing the exact question set and sustaining that should not gain level 4 anywhere on the mark scheme. I will take this opportunity to reassure candidates and centres that we do not need them to evaluate dozens of sources to get level 4. We said last year that 8 to 12 is plenty and we would prefer 8 to 12. We do not want to see dozens and dozens of sources. We do want to see a variety of types of sources being discussed, not just sources from historians. For example, we want to see contemporary sources, eyewitness accounts, cartoons, statistical sources, internet sources, memoirs, newspaper accounts. It is this wide range of types of sources that we need to see evaluated rather than historian after historian. Having said that, we do need at least 2 historians, and I would argue that 3 is plenty if using 8 sources. I do need to stress that the specification does limit the number of sources, and we think that 8 is plenty, more than 12 is too much. Put simply, 8 is great. This is a summary of the main points we're trying to make. We do want candidates to evaluate the sources for a purpose, to make them work, to use the sources and their judgment about the value of the sources while discussing the interpretation set, other possible interpretations, and the associated historiography. If they focus on the value of the sources rather than just on the content of the sources, then they will begin to integrate the source into their discussion and keep to the word limit. They do not have to integrate all the areas with every source, but they must integrate at least one of these issues with each source, otherwise they will end up doing source evaluation in isolation. The word limit set is 3,000 to 4,000 words excluding the sources. That means that when the students and the candidates go over 4,000 words, a penalty must apply. It seems to me that 3,000 to 4,000 words of their own is ample to deal with the issues concerned. It seems to me that making 8 sources work harder is one sure way to keep to the word limit. Most of the candidates are able to do so, and subject teachers should supervise the work to ensure the word limit is met. If not, when they are marking the work, they need to apply the penalty, which I will outline in a moment. A word count must now be provided by every candidate, and anything over 4,000 words must be penalised first by the subject teacher. Subject teachers should insist that the sources used are provided in the body of the essay and clearly labelled as own source. We would also like to see an appropriate bibliography at the end of the essay. When marking, subject teachers are encouraged to annotate the essay as fully as they can and pay attention to the assessment objectives in their approved mark scheme. we do not think that levels should be entered until the end of the essay. It is a summative judgment, so it is best to judge the level at the end of the essay. We would encourage subject teachers to provide a meaningful comment on the essay as to their reasons for awarding a particular level and a particular mark. Where possible, these comments should be drawn from the approved mark scheme. When marking the essays, we would suggest that the first judgment to be made is for AO2, which should lead the assessment. AO2B in particular is worth more marks than AO2A, but I would argue that they have to be used together to judge how well the candidate has used the sources to discuss the interpretation and the historiography. Subject teachers recall from an earlier comment that level 4 should only be awarded where there is a sustained and developed integrated response. In most cases, where the word limit is breached, it is breached substantially because the candidate includes irrelevant material or spends too much time explaining the content of the sources or puts in a load of notes on the events being considered. I would argue that candidates should debate rather than narrate using the sources. Most candidates, especially the more able, have the précis skills to keep to the limit, and we need to train the others to do so. The penalties to be applied are shown here and are not very different from the present regime for those who make the effort but just fail to keep to the limit. They have a deduction of 2 marks. The penalties do get more severe for those who do not try to keep to the word limit, and I would argue that is justified. Subject teachers should ensure that they make every effort to keep their candidates to the word limit, as is now the general practice in nearly all of the centres.